Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at Bachmann's N Scale model of Gordon, and like a lot of other people, this was a model that I was very excited for when it was first announced, and I'm sorry it's taken about like a year and a half since I first got him to review him, but better late than never, and without further ado, let's get into the review. Even at a glance, it's easy to tell that Bachmann have pretty much knocked this model out of the park for the most part. Obviously, there are a few small areas that are kind of not done as well as I think they could have been, but those areas have been pretty standard across the entire N scale range, so we'll go through those pretty quick when we get there. But as you can see, overall, all the proportions are correct and they look really, really good, and all of the paint application and lining is done very well. Alright, to get the obvious nitpick out of the way first, just because that's really like the only bad thing I have to say about the model for now, is that like obviously the wheels and coupling rods are not done quite as well as I feel like they could have been. Well, mostly just the wheels. The coupling rods are fine because that's a pretty standard. Uh, the thickness is a pretty standard issue with all N scale models except for like a few within the very last like couple of years. But anyway, going back to the wheels, I wish they weren't like solid like this and painted like completely blue because I feel like it looks a little weird. But that is something that they've done for a majority of the range, and it seems like that's something that's probably never going to go away. So, I mean, I guess at least it's consistent. Alright, looking at Gordon's face, you can see that it is very well done, and it is extremely accurate to the CGI face, and all of the printing with like the eyes and the eyebrows and the paint in the mouth is done very well, and it doesn't like spill over other areas, and it's not like chipped or anything, so that's nice. As you can see, he also has like lamp irons and the brake pipe on the front of his buffer beam, and I think those all look really good as well. And the nice thing is they don't feel extremely fragile, and with the brake pipe in particular, even though it's only attached in one place, it's kind of bendy, so it doesn't feel like it's just going to break, which is always a nice thing to see with fragile detailing. Alright, here's a quick look at Gordon's other side, and as you can see, all of the paint and lining is done just as well as it was on the other side. And I realized I forgot to mention the handrails, so I'll talk about them now. Obviously, they are molded on, as we've come to expect from like the Bachmann Thomas range in pretty much every scale. It would be cool if they were separately fitted, but I feel like if they were separately fitted, they probably would have been made of plastic, and so then I would have been worried about like how easy it could have been to break them. So I mean, obviously this is a compromise that Bachmann have always felt comfortable with doing for the Thomas range, and I will say that it like the handrails are at least raised off the body like by a decent amount so that you can feel them and you can tell like what they're supposed to be. So I mean that's a nice thing even if it may not be ideal. One thing I will point out on my model in particular though is that you can see there is a small spot where the uh, white didn't completely cover the blue on the running plate between the splashers, which and also there's a spot on the smoke box that uh, didn't quite get painted blue all the way. But I mean those are only small things, and I mean pretty much none of my other models have had something, so it was bound to happen to one of them at some point. And I mean the nice thing is that they're small enough so that it's really hard to tell when you're not this close up. But yeah, I just thought I'd point it out for the sake of the review. Alright, looking at the inside of the cab, you can see that it is kind of a strange shape inside, but that's because it was made to match the nitrogen like reference sheets rather than like any real uh, interior drawings of a cab. And I mean, so there's not really any detail in here, but the nice thing is some of it is at least painted black. Looking at Gordon's tender, you can see that the number and lining are applied very nicely and have nice sharp edges. Um, and you can see that the coal load also looks very nice and it matches the way it looks on the CGI render as well. And on the back of the tender, you can see the buffers are very nicely done, and the coupling hook and the brake pipe are also there and are nicely molded. The top of the tender is also painted black. Looking at the top of Gordon's boiler, you can see his handrails a little bit better, and you can also see that his safety valves and whistle have been done very nicely, and the gold paint there looks pretty good. Unfortunately, there is a little bit of a seam line on top of the boiler, but luckily it's not super visible from any sort of distance, so that's nice. Alright, here's a quick look at Gordon with some freight stock as well as some express coaches. And as you can see, he scales pretty well with the other items, and I imagine he'll look really good with his express coaches once they're released. Alright, now that Gordon's on the track, we can talk about his running quality. And overall, I'd say that he's a pretty decent runner. As you can see, he can start and stop pretty well without having like any issues really. And in general, he's pretty smooth while he's running as well. One thing I will say though is when you try and run him like super slow, he does kind of tend to cut out a little bit, and he's not necessarily as smooth as the other engines in the range. But I mean, the nice thing is at least that he's an express engine, so he won't really need to go this slow very much. But I just thought I'd point that out. And then because Gordon is a big engine, he's able to make it over all of the points pretty well. He does actually still struggle with the Y points a little bit, but that's something that all of the engines struggle with, so I'm not necessarily going to hold it against him, and I think it would be more of an issue with the points. But yeah, overall he is a pretty smooth runner over most track conditions I have got. And here's a quick close-up of Gordon's side rods moving. Alright, one thing I wanted to bring up before we move on to the running session is that unfortunately Gordon's tender wheels aren't very free rolling, and so the tender as a whole doesn't really roll very well, as you can see here. And the other tenders in the range for like James and Emily don't seem to have this problem, so that is a little unfortunate here. Although luckily Gordon does seem to be strong enough that that doesn't really give him issues. Alright, for my final thoughts on Gordon, I'd say that he's a pretty decent model overall. He's obviously very accurate to his CGI render, and all of his detail, both molded and separately fitted, are done very nicely. The lining and number are very crisp and don't really have any issues with scratches. Um, and then he's also a pretty capable model overall, and he runs smoothly, and he can pull pretty much anything I want him to, despite having the small issue with his tender wheels. And if you guys are looking into getting into N Scale, I definitely recommend picking Gordon up. I don't think you would regret getting him, and since he was executed pretty well, I'm definitely excited to see how Bachmann are able to do with their future engines and N-Gage. But thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.